Welcome to the Projector Planet Podcast, your curated guide to the energy of the week through the lens of astrology and human design. Join fellow projectors and planetary translators Katrina and Liz as we dive deep into the charts to help you understand how the cosmic forecast will affect you. This will allow you less resistance and more flow. Whether you're brand new to planetary transits, a seasoned astrologer, or simply curious about the basics of human design, especially as it relates to projectors, the Projector Planet Podcast is your portal to enlightenment. We invite all like-hearted souls to join us on this adventure in self-discovery. Subscribe now to the Projector Planet Podcast and let us be your guides to a universe of understanding your unique astrological gifts and stepping into your true power according to your design. Welcome back to the Projector Planet Podcast. My name is Liz and I'm here with one of my favorite projectors on the planet, Katrina, and we're here to talk about the fundamentals of human design. So we talk a lot about human design, and we realized that some of you may have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. And so we want to make sure that we give you guys a good fundamental understanding, because human design is kind of a new guy on the scene, whereas astrology has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Human design is a newer system. It was channeled in the 1980s, and it is a synthesis of lots of different old modalities, like the Jewish Kabbalah, the Chinese I Ching, the Hindu chakra system, and I'm forgetting one, the Jewish Kabbalah, the Chinese I Ching, the chakra system, and astrology. Oh yeah, that. So Katrina, what you are kind of newer to human design yourself, so why don't you kind of share what you feel or what your thoughts are?
Well, I'm excited about this episode because I feel like I'm going to learn a whole lot. You know me, I love to learn.
Yeah.
But human design, especially because obviously before we started talking about it and you had learned so much about it, I kind of knew a little bit, but it was very confusing for me trying to piece it together on Google. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot.
It's so much information.
It's so much. And it was almost, because astrology was a little easier that way for me. I did end up taking courses and all of that, obviously, but
yeah.
Because it's still hard. But human design, I feel like, is a whole next level, with so much information. I will say that my reading with you was on point. Everything that my human design chart shows is absolutely, who I am.
Accurate.
It's very accurate. And so just like astrology. And so it's definitely piqued my interest as far as learning more. I also, since we started doing the episodes, the transit episodes, I have such a better grasp now on how the transits work in human design.
Yes.
And the gates and all of that, which was very confusing to me before
Yes.
we started working together.
So like I said, human design has been, it was channeled, they call it a channeled system because it's a system that integrates all these things. It's just like our cultures have, it's like this system is a worldwide human system, but our cultures have caused us to study kind of different parts of it. And so the original channeler of human design, his name was Robert Allen Krakauer, and he then changed his name after he channeled human design to Ra Uru Hu. And he was from Canada, and he was a very cultured child, but I guess one morning in 1983, he kind of left his whole world behind. He was successful, advertising exec, magazine publisher, media producer, but he walked away, and he disappeared basically. And then several months later, he was traveling in the Mediterranean, and he found his way to Ibiza, which is a Mediterranean island off the coast of Spain. It's known for very spiritual and just very beautiful area. And so in on January 3rd of 1987, after living in Ibiza for some years, he encountered a voice, and he said it was like a terrifying experience. And the voice said, you know, are you ready to work? And then for 8 days, it was just transcribing this whole human design system. And he says that it was kind of like a wake up call, and showed how kind of ignorant he was to how his energy worked and how, you know, people were operating in the complete wrong way according to their energy types. And so yeah, he dedicated the rest of his life to this system. But the system and the channel that he received, it went back in history, and it gave him basically kind of a perspective on the universe from the beginning of time. And so starting like back with like the Big Bang, you know, 13.7 billion years ago, you know, everything had mass, existed in like a single particle. And when that particle split, it broke into yin and yang, which are broke into 6 quarks and 6 leptons, which these quarks are yin energy, which is like up, down, beauty, truth. And then yang is leptons, which are made of like electrons and then neutrinos. And neutrinos are like what we study in astrology, like how the energy from the planets and all the things are streaming in, and that's what creates our personality and everything like that. So the human design is very much, I realize I need to turn my notifications off. Human design is very much, you know, takes all of that into account. And it talks about a lot about these neutrino streams, which are these light streams that come in through planetary energies and like break through, like, you know, when we talk about transits, you know, say we're talking about the full moon, we're talking about an opposition of the sun and the moon. So what does that mean is you have these light streams of energy coming through the sun in, you know, the moon in Aries and the sun in Libra. And so what does that mean with coming through those archetypes? So so it's a lot about how we should be making decisions based on our energy, as well as how our energy works in terms of, you know, other people as well in our relationships. So it's a very helpful system to where astrology kind of tells you the what, human design kind of tells you the like how you should be acting out in the world, kind of according to your energy type. Most people, when they think of like the Hindu chakra system, and I want to quick say, if you have not looked at your human design, you know, go to mybodygraph.com. It's a fabulous website, and it will ask you for your birth data, and you just put it in, and it'll bring up your human design, and you'll be able to see a body graph that has a lot of different shapes and channels, and so we hope that this will help kind of decipher that. So we used to be 7-centered beings. We used to be like, we used to have 7 chakras. So we would have the root, the sacral, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the third eye or the ajna, and the crown. In 1781, which was the end of the scientific revolution, it marked a major turning point in our evolution. And so human beings actually went from 7-centered energy beings to 9-centered. And so when you look up your human design chart, you may notice that there's not the chakras are not like all lined up. They're kind of spread out around the body graph. But what happened during that time was humans broke off from being born into your class, kind of. Like if you were back before the scientific revolution, if you were born a blacksmith, you're going to stay one. If you were born, you know, there was no way to ascend. There was no real like sovereignty or anything over your own destiny. There was no idea that you could control your environment or anything like that. And so the, we're moving, in 1781, the heart chakra broke into two, and it broke into the G center and what's known as the will center in human design. And then the the solar plexus chakra broke into two, and that broke into the emotional solar plexus and the spleen. And so that is breaking us from being completely fear-based to being more able to rationalize and respond as opposed to react out of fear.
I love that on the full moon in Aries, when we're recording this, we're talking about sovereignty.
Yes. Yeah, no kidding.
I got goosebumps when you start talking about that.
We're getting ready to go through another one of these evolutions. It's not going to be we're not going to be breaking into any more centers, but it's going to be surrounded around the emotional solar plexus. And so we'll get into that and what that means. It's the 2027 mutation. So basically when we talk about yin and yang, the yin is like the building blocks of matter, and yang is the neutrino energy, like the light energy. So it's like it's like the building blocks of matter and light that create this world. And the Chinese I Ching is one of the oldest documents about this concept, and it talks about archetypes of energy. And so that I Ching is then placed, the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching are placed around the astrology wheel as a way to better define. If you look at like a house in astrology that has 30 degrees, what the Chinese I Ching or the hexagrams do is they break down by like 6 degrees what exactly each archetype within that little portion is, based on where it is in relation to other things going on. And so it's a way to really even further explain archetypes of energy, like astrology. And so we have the G center, and we'll talk about the centers more in our second episode. But when we went from 7 centers to 9 centers, that was around the time that we discovered the planet Uranus, which was in 1781, and it ushered in the Uranian age, expanded our life expectancy, taking us off the traditional 10 7-year Saturn cycles, and into like an 84-year life is considered to be. And this is also when projectors came onto the scene, because when we're going to talk about the types here. So there are 5 energy types in human design. There are manifestors, there are manifesting generators, projectors, and reflectors. And so we're going to get into all of it. And basically, when you think about your type, that is talking about how your energy works. And so when you look at your human design chart, you're going to notice in the middle there's a body graph. If you expand the view, it'll also show you the big wheel around it and all of the astrology. And so you'll also have a birth chart, kind of just in the same way that you would in astrology. And so you have, where the sun, the earth, the moon, the north and south node, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, all of those things in the birth chart. But in human design, we actually have 2 birth charts. So we have the chart from the day we were born, which is considered our personality chart, which is in black on your human design. If you look at the channels, a lot of times on most traditional programs, it's colored in darker. And so that's really the archetypes that we're very conscious of in our life. And then we have the red parts of our design. Those are considered our design planets and design chart, and those are things that we kind of grow to work toward. We evolve into. They're things that are kind of playing on behind the scenes. But this design chart, as opposed to the personality chart, was derived 3 months before your birth. So there is a large increase in brain growth and brain development during that time, and it's kind of like when your soul comes in to the body. It is that design date, and then you have the personality date. So you'll have 2 charts. And so, and I want to know kind of your opinion on this, because the planets in human design do represent a lot of the same things as they do in astrology, obviously. So the sun is like your personality, expression, life force. We also take into account where the earth is, which is something different, which I guess, what is considered where the earth is in astrology?
I mean, when you're in well, no, because when you're in astrology, it's like you're standing on the earth and kind of looking at this like circle. You know what I mean? Around it. So
yeah.
The earth doesn't, like in astrology, you don't have like an earth sign.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, obviously Virgo, Capricorn, those are earth signs, but as far as like the earth itself, it's really not like placed in the chart anywhere, because it's from the perspective of the earth, right? Looking outward. So I do think that's interesting, because a lot, you know, in my studies of astrology, a lot of people have asked that question, like, well, why don't we have like an earth sign, or why don't we and so I feel like human design, you know, as I'm listening to you, it's almost like an evolution of astrology, right?
It is.
So the astrology, I feel like, is really important, and you know, I'm super into that. That's my thing. But what I love about human design is, you know, I'm so Aquarius that I'm all about that evolution.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is like next level. And so I feel like knowing the astrology is really important. But then if you want to dig deeper, that human design layer is like everything. And I find just, you know, it's fascinating. And I find that just knowing those things about myself, and as you were describing, like the red part that we kind of evolve into, like knowing that ahead of time really helps you evolve.
Yes, it does.
Do you know what I mean? If you
does.
know, like, this is what I'm here to evolve into, it's not that it makes it easy, right? Because we still have to do the work to evolve. But I find that it helps, especially because whether we're talking about human design or astrology, the transits and the things that are happening are really resonant, like in my life, what's going on in my life and what's going on within me and around me. And so, and as you said, with other people, our family and the people we interact with, it's really helpful.
Oh, knowing your partner, your children's, your own, all of that in human design is so helpful to it just gains a deeper understanding of how they operate, because we kind of always want to put everything under our own lens. You know, why is this person doing this? It's got to be because of me, or it's got to be like we're the main star in everybody else's movie.
We personalize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's we struggle with that, and so human design really teaches us, you know, how to kind of step back and say, oh, this is just how this person's energy works, or this is just how, you know, this person needs rest. They're not lazy, they just need more rest than other people, because that's how their energy works. So it's very good.
It's very helpful. My daughter, and it is, we've talked about on the podcast before, is she's very Christian now. And so that's been really, you know, I can see it in the chart, Saturn in her 9th house, all these different things. But the human design gave me a new element when you're like, hey, she has this martyr line.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And it gave me this whole new level of understanding my daughter, and being able to not personalize that, and to be able to have, you know, healthier conversations around, not that we weren't, I mean, it's just easier now that I know her and how she operates. You know, it's not personal to me. She's really coming from a place, and she's very convicted of this. Do you know what I mean? And viewing it that way allows me to kind of approach the conversations with a more level head, and be able to kind of get through to her and those types of things.
So when you look at your body graph, you're going to see that you're going to have some colored, and you're going to see a picture of like a body kind of, and there's going to be some triangles, a diamond shape, some squares, and then a bunch of different channels running in between each one. And so you're going to see that some of your your centers, we call them, like the triangles and squares. Some of those are going to be colored in, and some of those are going to be open or undefined. And so, and we're going to go into each one in the next episode, but just keep in mind at this junction that your definition is like the fixed and dependable parts of yourself that is like to be embraced and expressed. It's kind of, it's what we amplify out into the world, like a, and it also could be like where people think we're too much. And so that, that's also a thing. But it's where we can draw like consistent, reliable energy. So it kind of, it sets parameters for who we are becoming. And like I said, it's like a transmitter. It's, sending out frequencies, to the world. Whereas your white, or undefined areas, is where we take in experience and wisdom, and then we reflect it back or amplifying it back out to the world. And so actually people with a lot of undefined centers can be the ones that are pegged as being way more emotional or way more this way or that way, but it's really that they're absorbing the energy from their environment and amplifying it back out. And it's not really their stuff, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, especially because when I learned my undefined centers, it completely made sense to my life and what I amplified.
So look at your chart and it'll tell you what your type is. So if you look and it says you're a manifestor, you're a projector, a reflector, and then it'll tell you what your profile is, and we'll talk a little bit about profiles later. But then it's going to talk, you'll see very clearly what centers in your chart are defined and which ones are undefined. And so going back a little bit into the birth chart, I just wanted to do a deeper dive into kind of what the planets represent in human design. So the sun is like our life force energy. The sun in our charts is the yang energy. It is ourself as well as what we do. It represents the archetype of the father. 70% of the neutrinos that condition us are from the sun. And so our personality sun is like our light in the world. And then our design theme is like our genetic themes inherited from our father. So you have your design sun, which is red on your chart. And then you have your personality sun, which is the sun that's in black. And then we have earth, which is grounding and balance. It's our physical manifestations brought into form. Also how we balance the sun's energy. It provides the yin balance and represents the archetype of the mother, backbone, or stability. Then we have the moon, which is our driving force. It's what moves us. It's the force kind of driving our design. It's a pull reflecting the sun, but also pulling things into form on earth. It represents the archetype of the eldest daughter. It's reflected light and things others see in us more than what we see in ourselves.
Oh, so that's a little different than astrology, but I like it.
Yeah.
I like that.
The north node is our future direction and environment. The personality north node frames what your personality thinks about the world, and your design node frames your relationships and the people in it, and then also the environment. So we want to shift into the north node. We're always shifting toward our north node, and that kind of happens around our Uranus opposition, which is kind of the same.
No, what I'm going through right
Right,
now.
so happy times for you. And what's your north node is?
Virgo.
Virgo, okay. And then the south node is our past direction and environment. So this is our developmental immature phase. Again, the Uranus opposition marks the transition from south to north node, focus. And I'm about to go through mine too, so getting ready to get into all that Leo energy.
I really like
so
yours
excited.
so much better than mine.
Like, please, I need
Can
to
we switch?
Can we have some luxury here? Yeah.
Details and health and habits.
Yeah.
Sounds way less fun than Leo. I'm just saying.
And then we have Mercury, which is our communication and thinking. It's the archetype of the eldest son, expansion of human consciousness. It's closest to the sun, so often has the sun's ear. And Mercury programs the personality like from the time it enters the body until birth. And so Venus is our values, morals, natural laws for how we deal with each other. It's the archetype of the youngest daughter, love and beauty, that kind of thing. But also Venus is kind of harsh if you don't act with moral clarity. And then the values that are established in Venus become laws in Jupiter. So,
which makes sense. Jupiter governs laws, and yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, but going to Mars real quick. Mars is immature energy. It's the youngest sun archetype, energetically immature. And so it's passive until it gets rolling, and then it build momentum. And then when refined, it can morph into like mature wisdom, but it can be very immature energy as far as human design goes. It's
I was
like
going to say in astrology it can be as well.
Oh yeah. It's definitely the part of our chart that, we need to like be mindful of. I think, our Mars. I mean, I've been feeling this Mars and Libra transit like hardcore. So and then, like I said, with Jupiter, it's laws and protection. It has a big impact on our development. It has those 11-year cycles, and living by the law of your Jupiter, you will be rewarded generously. And then Saturn is the judge. So
Go figure.
Yeah, the place that you must deal with the consequences of your actions.
Daddy Saturn.
Yeah, but it's actually a yin force, and it's like the expectant taskmaster without praise. If Saturn
just do it because it needs to be done.
Yeah, if Saturn is leaving you alone, it's a good indication that you're doing the right thing. So as long as you're not being, attacked by Saturn, you're totally fine. But Uranus is unusualness, chaos, and order. This is where you like kind of let your freak flag fly, and then this is what I said extended our lifespan to 84 years. And then we have Neptune, which is illusion and spirituality. It's very similar to astrology. A great teacher that demands total acceptance. Neptune in any gate veils its potential. So that's interesting. And then Pluto is truth and transformation and brings the forces of the subconscious to the surface. So the truth teller, and then finding light in the darkness. So when we look at our human design charts, it's really like the kind of electromagnetics of how we operate. And so oftentimes we will find we are attracted to people. Like if we have a gate, you'll see a bunch of like lines or channels. You'll notice if in your chart, if you have defined centers, so centers that are colored in, you will always have a channel between those centers. Because that's what's bringing that definition. And so the connections that we get between people there's 4 different kinds of connections. They're either electromagnetic, which is like one partner defines one end of the gate and the other, which completes the channel together. That's like the basic form of attraction. And then we have dominance, which is where one partner defines the whole channel and the other partner doesn't have it at all. We have compromise, which is where one partner defines the whole channel while the other defines one of the gates. And then we have companionship, which is where both partners have the same channel or gate defined. And so I want to get back a little bit into the energy and the types of energy. And so we talk a lot about projectors. But like I said, there are 5 types. And so I'm going to go through the types and I'm going to go into a little bit about so I'm going to talk about the type, and then I'm also going to talk about the strategy for that type. So that way you kind of understand that when they go together. So we're going to start with manifestors. Manifestors, and you just told me that you found out that somebody at your job is a manifestor.
Yeah, she loves the podcast and she's been listening, and so we talk about it. And I told her I thought she was going to be a projector just based on our conversations. But yeah, she's actually a manifestor.
So when we first started out in this world, we were all reflectors actually. But manifestors were some of the also other very early types. And what it means to be a manifestor is that you have two things. You have an undefined sacral center, and you have you have a motor to your throat. So there's 4 motor centers in human design. There's the sacral center, the emotional solar plexus, the will center, and the root center. Those are all considered motors. There's like literal energy in those centers for you to go out and like get shit done, basically. And so manifestors, they don't have sacral energy. And that is your real like go-getting energy. That's what makes you be able to just go and work. So manifestors actually need cycles of rest, much like projectors or reflectors.
Maybe
do.
that's why I thought she was a projector.
Yeah, yes, it could be. And a lot could do with her profile too.
Oh yeah, I don't know that. So
but yeah. So she when it says you're a manifestor, that means that you have an undefined sacral and you have a motor to your throat, which means that you're here to get things started. And that is through, internal nonverbal connection to inspiration, creativity. So when you live by your connection to source as a manifestor, and you're, getting all of these inspirations and you're informing other people, you're really the design type to be able to really put things out there and actually like get them to happen. I mean, if we think of some famous manifestors, like Frida Kahlo was a manifestor, Donald Trump is a manifestor, just to give out 2 ends of the spectrum. But they have an aura that is repelling, actually. And so they can be, because they like to be in their creative process, they don't want to be bothered by other people. And so their aura is naturally like, back up a little bit. My stepdaughter's a manifestor. She kind of has this where it's a little bit like, they can be a little bit unapproachable, especially if they're in their creative flow. And so you can be a little bit intimidating. You think in terms of flow and action. And people often will see a manifestor in action, and they have this kind of where they're cleaning up the kitchen, and they're just like going from one thing to another, and they're, gathering things here and doing this there, and they have this plan kind of in their head. But if somebody comes in and is like, hey, can I help you with that? They're like, ugh, God, why are you bothering me, kind of thing.
I wonder, that's interesting. I don't know her outside of work, so it would be interesting to hear, for her to hear this later and talk to her about it. She definitely really appreciated, because she's a massage therapist where I work.
Yeah.
And we did a session together where I let her do the total spiritual stuff. We did the Reiki, and we did, and she was so thankful. I was thankful, but then she's like, no, thank you, because not a lot of people let her do that. And I feel like she's so connected to that, like you're talking about, and that's like a way for her to be in her creative, force, and she doesn't get to do it a lot.
Makes sense.
So it'd be interesting to talk to her about this later.
So their strategy, their anger, like I said, is they're not self-themed. So that's kind of how when they get out of alignment, that's what can come out is anger. And it's usually when they're interrupted during their creative flow or creative time. They do not like that. And so that is they're not self-themed. And then, like I said, their strategy, so how they're supposed to deal with this energy that they have, which is like this repelling aura, is to inform people. And so that just means like they kind of have their own game going in their head of everything they're going to do. And so like a lot of times manifestor kids will just do stuff and their parents are like, what are you doing? And so it's really important for them to inform people of what they're doing. That will ease a lot of conflict. And this is true too for the next one we're going to talk about, which is manifesting generator. But it's informing people. It's not asking permission. It's just letting people know. And so these people are here to get things started. But they also need rest. They can struggle with sleep. They're like the type that they'll get inspired. They're like a Steve Jobs was a manifestor. Like they'll get inspired and they'll just be up for
I feel like
days
this is
and days
definitely
and days.
who we're talking about.
Yes.
Oh, we've talked about that. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So they can struggle with sleep, you know, and it's all about, you know, are you expressing this power you have, or are you hiding it? And we'll get into the more about that defined throat and the motor to the throat and what that means. But the throat is kind of the gearbox in human design, and it's what differentiates us from humans if you think about it, because we have the ability to communicate. And so that communication is what actually gets things done in this world, and was able to, you know, build everything that we have now, is that being able to speak. And so that's what speak, write, create, whatever, anything like that comes from
no
that
other
throat.
Species
Right.
does that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to move on to a manifesting generator. So manifesting generators, they're kind of like the unicorns. Like, everybody wants to be a manifesting generator. Like,
I
that.
don't.
I know. I'm like, they're too, like, they're like, they have the energy level of like a gray dog.
I will never forget when I
Okay?
met your brother, we were talking for a while, and you're like, oh, by the way, he's a manifesting generator. No, I couldn't tell.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I know. They're very, they can be intense people. But it's important to remember, so when you're a manifesting generator, that means that you have a defined sacral center, but you also have it to the throat. And usually it's your sacral to the throat is what makes you a manifesting generator. And so and this is my little Emmy is a manifesting generator. And so that's why the manifesting generators, the generators too, make the sounds. They are like sound people, because they make these kind of like guttural, like
That's what convinced John of human design.
Yeah.
Because he's done that his whole life. And
Yeah.
I remember laughing so hard when you're like, does he make weird sounds?
Yeah. So, so you're a generator first and foremost. So you actually need to use the strategy of responding. But you also have this internal creative flow that wants to find the fastest way to do things. And so because of that, sometimes you will just have to go back and fix things. That's just like a normal part of your process. But you want to be like the most efficient, the fastest, you want to just like get stuff done. But you need to be waiting to respond. So where frustration comes up is manifesting generators, they want to go, do, go put their stuff out there all the time. But really their strategy is, because all generator types have a warm and inviting aura. So their aura is like basically the opposite of a manifestor, where manifestors like, get away from me, and their aura says that. Generators are like these people that everybody's drawn to.
I can see that.
Yeah, they're just like, they just have that spark. They have, and it's that sacral energy that they have. It's just that life force energy. And they're just so, people are just, they're drawn to them. And so what their strategy is for that type of energy is to wait to respond. So they're responding to things that come into their aura or come into their field with those, and if they have sacral authority, especially with those sounds. And they should be moving toward things that are making them happy or lighting them up. And you'll notice if you take a generator or a manifesting generator out into the world, they'll naturally move toward things that they like. Okay? And so where they go wrong is when they're trying to do things that are not really lighting them up, and they're overcommitting themselves. Because they're in such high demand socially, people,
and they just want to do,
and they want to make people happy and all of that stuff, and so they tend to spread themselves too thin. So manifesting generators, you do need to wait to respond to things as they come into your field, but then inform people of what you're going to be doing. But just know that you are designed to skip steps. You are also designed to wear yourself out completely at the end of the day. Like, a lot of times Mani-gens will struggle, and gens too, will struggle with sleep because they're not wearing them. They haven't fully expelled that sacral motor by the end of the day. And so you wouldn't think that would affect their sleep, but they still have all this energy that's like going in their body. So it's very important for them to have an exercise regimen. because energy will escape in any way, right? Like if you're not exercising it out, it'll come out in a tantrum, it'll come out in a, yelling, or it'll come out in, so it's very, very important for manifesting generators and generators. But manifesting generators especially, they just have so much damn energy. You need to just go buy yourself a dog that needs to be walked 3 or 4 times a day.
Expel it, get it out. I guess there are days I wish I was a manifesting generator.
I know, right?
Because as a projector, the energy is scarce.
It is. I know. Yes. So what they need to do is realize that it's not so much that you need to pick something and stick with it. You're meant to kind of sample in a lot of ways, like a line 3 person is. So you're meant to kind of sample your environment and see what works for you. And so next that brings us to just your classic generator, which the difference between the two is that your classic generator has a sacral motor, but they do not have a motor to the throat. So they're here to physically manifest and become an expert learner. But they can get stuck in cycles of quitting. So they get to a point where something gets hard and they give up. They don't move past that learning curve. So it's kind of a stair step. So first couple weeks learning a new thing, you have a surge of mastery, and then you eventually hit a plateau, and that's when you get frustrated. And so a lot of times generators are like, well, with the waiting to respond, does that mean I just need to sit around and wait? But it's more, you're designed to follow what feels good, and then learning to reconnect with that sacral and that is really key for generators, is to listen to those natural sounds. And oftentimes those are as a child, they're don't say that, or saying is rude or whatever, but that's their natural sound they're supposed to make when they're attracted to something.
So I like that because it's something I think I can talk to John about, because I don't think he pays much attention to the sounds he makes. He's just making these sounds. And and the conversation he and I had before you asked me, and you had no idea, I had never told you this, but you were like, does he make these sounds? When his boys were young, he would rock Nick, and he was a single father. So, he would rock Nick, and they would both be making these sounds. And it would be interesting to see what Nick was. I don't know what time he was born though, but he was at school making those sounds, and the teacher was so upset about it that she called John. So you're right, it was don't make those sounds, it's disruptive,
right? So
it was teaching Nick not to listen to those sounds, not to
internal sacral authority. So one thing I should point out is that generators and manifesting generators, they make up about 70% of the population. So if you say I'm not sure what he is, it is more than likely that he is one of those two things. So, because they're designed to be the learners and the doers, kind of, and the physical manifestors. You have the manifestors, the pure manifestors, who are about 8% of the population and shrinking. And then you have projectors are about 20%. And then the rest is really generators, because reflectors are only 1%.
Yeah, it would make sense because, he's a sheriff, and so he works a lot. Yeah. And then he also cans, and he also likes to, he's always
got all that energy.
He's just expels energy. He's putting these, he has a garden he takes care of. He just never seems to run out of energy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that brings us to projectors. And projectors are here to guide energy. So we can see the potential, and see what we need to do on a cosmic level, to kind of keep the energy grid clean. And so projectors' auras are what's called focused and absorbing. So we can be kind of intense people, as far as when you first meet someone. If they recognize us, they can get all kinds of great wisdom, nuggets of, information. We can tell them all about themselves, and they'll take it. If they don't recognize us or don't invite us to share, we just come off as straight bitchy and bossy people. Like it's repelling. It kind of almost flips into manifestor aura if we're not recognized and not invited, which is why the projector strategy is to wait for the invitation. And that could be invitation or recognition. So people need to recognize and invite us to use this energy to guide them. Because, I mean, if you think about it, we're supposed to be guides, and we can see kind of, and if there are projectors listening, I know you can see everything that's wrong in all of your close personal relationships and what is going on with all of those people. I know for a fact. And so, but it's not your job to fix them or tell them or even, offer your advice to them without being recognized or invited. Because if you do, you're just going to find that people are just going to reject you. And I don't know if you have experiences when you were younger, or you can think of
so many before learning all of what I know now. But I will say, because you also, and I'm sure you'll get into this, about how we're supposed to master systems. Mm-hmm. And one of the ones I feel like I guess mastered in the early stages was like psychology and human behavior. Mm-hmm. So my thing was, especially before I knew about waiting for the invitation, is I'm going to tell you from a psychological perspective all kinds of stuff that's wrong, and here's how you fix it. Do you know what I mean?
People just love that.
No, not so much. I was trying to be helpful, but like you said, with certain people, it obviously worked because they were receptive and open to that. And of course, now that I know that information, I'm a bit more cautious about what I say and when I say it. But I could tell stories for days about when I acted without recognition or invitation.
Yes, it doesn't ever go well.
Never.
And
it just makes you bitter.
It does. The bitterness is the not self theme for projectors. Now, Karen Curry Parker, who I do a lot of study with in human design, and she's actually one of Ra Uru Hu's original students. So she's one of the ones left that actually studied with the original channeler of human design. And she talks about projectors as they're kind of like the manifestors of the future. Because now that everything is built, all of now it's time to guide the resources. And so, manifestors we were so focused on building everything up that, now all the systems are in place, and some of them need to go, frankly. But, for the most part, and so now it's going to be guiding the resources, especially the human resources. And so projectors didn't come around as an energy type until that Uranus discovery in like the 1700s. So it was very close in line with when projectors came on the scenes, is when we did this whole shift, which just makes total sense. And so projectors are going to play a huge role. We tend to have a lot of self-worth issues because of being rejected so many times, or being told that we were too much or too bossy or too know-it-all-y or whatever.
My ex-husband would always tell me, you take me through Trina moments. That's it. Yeah. Trina moments. That's what he would call them, because I was too much. I was, you know what I mean? And so, I look back on that now and it's kind of funny. I understand it now. But at the time it wasn't funny, because anytime I would get excited or want to share or something, he never gave me an invitation. Like it just wasn't happening. So there was a lot of rejection in my first marriage because of that. And then he would just be like, oh, you take me through changes. Oh, you give, it's Trina moments, as he would call them, So it's super interesting when you know this now and you look back on it,
For sure.
So
there's been so many times, and I think part of why I would try to go for positions where I was managing people is because I could use that recognition I got just from being in that position and it was more well received.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
So that I look at it like that too. And so sometimes now that I'm not managing people directly anymore and I'm self-employed, I can run into that sometimes again, where I need to wait for the invitation or I need to be recognized, which is why I'm not a super like, I don't call people or anything. Most of my business is referral because I know my strategy, and I know that me putting myself out there and like trying to like call somebody up and, you know, offer to sell them a home or offer to do anything is not really going
Is this
to
why I was
work.
never so good at sales?
Yeah,
Like,
it's not
you know,
even necessarily. It's the pushing. What projectors are designed to do is, like you said, master a system, and you become the resource, and so people are just drawn to you, and then sales are easy because people want to know what you know because you've taken the time and energy to master a system. And so with projectors, our energy is such, we have undefined sacrals and no motor to the throat. So we are not supposed to push or initiate or we can put ourselves out there in our own mastering of our own system. I don't want people to think like, oh, I just have to like sit in my house and wait for invitations. In fact, the more aligned you are with mastering your system, and the more you're displaying that to people, but still not in a, come buy from me way, but more, this is what I'm doing, and this is what's helped in my life, and this is how I've used this here, then the invitations will start to come. The more aligned projector, and it's so weird because invitations that you would not even expect, like I got one earlier this week to be, in the City Pulse as a contributing person, an article about credit card processing fees.
Over a comment on
yes,
Facebook.
Because of a comment I made on Facebook.
Which was very in line with the Mercury trine to Jupiter, by the way.
But but stuff like that. And of course, so I looked at that invitation. I got a splenic yes. We'll talk about authority here in a minute. And yeah, it was good. I was like ready to go.
Yeah, I'm really glad
I had a fabulous, it was a great interview.
Good. And I'm really glad you explained that, because we talked about before, just our conversations, when I first learned that I had to wait for an invitation, how upsetting that was for me.
Oh, everybody has to wait.
Yeah. Well, until I learned, though, what you're talking about, which is I don't have to sit and wait. Like,
right.
I can still write my blog, and I can still do this podcast, and I can still, it's just forcing it on people,
right,
that I can't do. If I put myself out there and then somebody wants to listen, well, that's the invitation, right?
Exactly.
That's or at least recognition.
Yes.
In that term. But yeah, so.
And the more formal the invitation, the better, and the more aligned to, like, if you're invited to speak or invited to contribute, or you get like an actual invitation in the mail to go to an event or something like that. So
yeah,
that's, and then like I said, it's all about waiting, though, because even manifestors need to wait for that divine inspiration, and manifesting generators need to wait to respond. Projectors need to wait for the invitation, and then we get to the last one, which is reflectors. Now reflectors they make up 1%, and they were actually the original design. They had no defined centers.
Well, you just said, and just because we did say we were going to talk about it before we moved to reflectors, do you want to talk about the not self-bitterness?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
That's
Let's
okay.
go back. Yep. No, that's a good point. So projectors, our theme to know that we're in alignment is we feel success. The theme to know that we're out of alignment is we feel bitter. And bitter is insidious, and it is because it's not like anger where you would just blow up and it can be done, or frustration where you can move through the wave. Bitterness is a long, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you just feel like there's this injustice or an unfairness happening, and a lot of times we feel bitter when we aren't taken seriously because we didn't wait for the damn invitation.
Which is a good segue to what we talk about all the time, which is where are we choosing our own bitterness and resentment.
Yes.
Because if we know our strategy is waiting for the invitation and we're not waiting for it, well, that bitterness is our own fault.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So yeah, and it's just funny because we're talking about invitations, like formal invitations. One of the therapists at work that I'm really close to, not the one we were talking about, her birthday's coming up. And so tomorrow they're getting together at the Avenue at 7:00 for
I
like
was just
drinks
there.
and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And she not only did she put an invitation in my box, but then yesterday she verbally was like, "You're coming, right?" And this is not something I would typically do. So
You should. It's cool.
and I'm like, I don't drink or anything. So like, it wasn't something I wanted to do, but it's interesting that I got this invitation twice. Once on paper and then once verbally yesterday. So
What did your spleen say?
I really don't want to go. But I don't know if that's real spleen. There was no splenic response to it that I can think of. It was just like, it's just like, I don't do bars. I don't do drinking. So it was just like why would I go? Type thing. So we'll see how I feel tomorrow because I have to work tomorrow. So
Well, that is one thing about a splenic authority is it can change. So, yeah, sometimes you may have to ask yourself the question closer to the time.
Well, I think just energy level wise too, I'm concerned because I do work 8 hours tomorrow before this.
True.
And I get out at 4, and then is that enough time to get home and kind of get
you
myself
have to
together
remember
before?
Too, though, you can when you talk about our open centers, that is where we absorb energy. And so with projectors and reflectors and manifestors, we have an open sacral. So we actually can absorb and do things in a much faster, because we're absorbing and amplifying, right? So we can actually work faster, harder, and have more energy than a generator or a manifesting generator in the short term. You know what I mean? Like a projector could come in and get a job done that would take a generator maybe twice the time. But they could only do that maybe once a week, and then they would have to take a break.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So it's but you can absorb other people's energy when you go out into social settings and things like that. It might wear you out, but I don't see a scenario where you would go and feel tired while you were there. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So. Moving on though, did you want to talk about anything else about projectors?
No,
we talk about them a lot.
We
Obviously,
do.
throughout the podcast.
The biggest thing for me was just making sure that they understood the not self of the bitterness and how a lot of times that's a choice because we're putting ourselves out there without an invitation and feeling that rejection.
Yeah.
And so really looking at yourself and going, what system am I learning to master right now? How can I put that out there without, you know what I mean? Without being pushy, without trying to force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last energy type we're going to talk about is reflectors, and that was the original energy type that was on the planet. And they're, like I said, have all open center, or all, I shouldn't say open, because open means you have like no channels or no gates, but they have all undefined centers. So they're their chart is completely white. And it is rough. They are very, very in tune with the moon. And so they have to, if you think about it, the moon absorbs energy, so do reflectors. And so they absorb, their strategy, their not self is disappointment. And so they don't want to be disappointed, but their strategy is to wait a moon cycle to make a decision. And so it's really, if you think of like a community, manifestors are the ones that are like, okay, over here we're going to build this town, and here's my vision for it. This is what's going to go here. This is what's going to go here. The manifesting generators are the ones that are like, the projectors are like, the manifestors are like telling the projectors, and the projectors are like, okay, we need some mani-gens over here and some gens over here and some this to do this, and we're going to guide all this energy here. Mm-hmm. But we can still guide manifestors too, and then the generators and the mani-gens are actually doing the physical labor and building the buildings, and the reflectors are kind of like off to the edge being fed grapes. They need to be kept comfortable because they are a direct reflection of their environment that they are in. And so you can tell the health of an environment by the reflector and the environment, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes sense.
So they are a non-energy type, so they're not really meant to work at all. I mean, most of them have to.
That's got to be really difficult in today's world.
Yeah, because of capitalism, they have to.
Like we sell like 75% of our time for chump change.
Exactly. So it can be very difficult. But your reflectors, like I said, they do just reflect what the environment is, and so they can be they're like our barometers, our social barometers. It is a difficult type, which is why there's only 1% of them. I mean, it's, you know what I mean?
I was gonna say, I don't even know a reflector.
My grandmother was a reflector.
Okay.
The only ones, Michael Jackson was a reflector.
Really?
Sandra Bullock is a reflector.
Interesting.
So yeah, but they, like I said, mirror their environment, which is it can be a lot of pressure, and they can get disappointed very easily. But they're a very soft energy, and they're, you know what I mean? People are drawn to them in a way. They can be kind of houses for people's problems and issues and things like that. They're very, like I said, they're very in touch with the moon, so that's what they need to base all of their decisions on, is how so if something comes up, it comes in as like an opportunity, you really need to wait that cycle to see if it's something that you can commit your energy to as a reflector. So they're very, like I said, rare, and so you won't even, it's that we call them, like, they're the true magical unicorns of human design, because there's really very, very few of them. But a lot of them are led into like the healing arts and things like that, because they are able to reflect people. So that is the 5 types. And so now that kind of shows us, the types show us how our energy works, and your authority is based on the definition of your chart. So, you know, there's a lot of waiting. Like I said, we're all kind of like meant to wait. But then when it does come time to make a decision, there's a specific way, depending on what's called your authority, that you are to make a decision. And so manifesting generators and generators have a defined sacral, and many of them have what's called sacral authority. So if you're a generator, manifesting generator, you will always have this colored in, the sacral center. And this is, like I said, it's a motor, and it does give you the sustainable, like, working and learning and nurturing energy. And it does respond with the And so you need to start to make these sounds in your life. And then one thing that's very helpful for sacral authority people when they're trying to get back in touch with their natural is for people to ask them questions, and how they naturally respond to questions maybe they already know, like, you know, and so they can feel how it is in their body, the but that's really what they need to be following moment to moment, is so it's hard for them because they have all of these obligations, and then and they don't, sometimes it's very difficult.
It's very easy to overpromise and underdeliver.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they might want to say but when you have a pure sacral authority, it's easier, I think, than if you have a defined sacral with an emotional authority. And we'll go into that in a minute. The next type of authority is a splenic authority, and that's what you and I both have. So if you have a defined, if you have a defined sacral and you have an undefined emotional center, you're a sacral authority. If you have a defined spleen center, which is the triangle on the left of the body graph, and you don't have a defined sacral, and you don't have a defined emotional solar plexus, you have splenic authority. Now, the spleen is a whisper. It's like a fear. A lot of it is based in either fear or intuition. It's like just a knowing. And it is always looking for life-threatening situations, and so versus like existential dread. And so it can be the fear of being seen, the fear of failing, the fear of death, and it's a moment by moment what is right. And so you and I both have splenic authority. It's an older type of authority, and it's like you get a splenic yes or a no, or I feel like I should get up and go do this, or this is the right thing for me to order, or this is the right thing. You just know in the moment. Where splenic authority people get into trouble is their mind takes over, or the emotional center takes over almost instantly, and it can override our decision making when we know what is right in the very moment. I know you have stories of this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just since we've started talking about it more, one recent example is I was doing laundry, and I had this quick, it was there and gone, thought that I should check the pockets in this one jacket that I wear to work. And I thought, oh no, I don't ever keep anything in my pockets. And when I put everything in the dryer, there was a bunch of change in the washer, So it was like, oh, I probably should have checked that pocket. So, and it's a funny story, but it just gave me an aha moment about, wow, if it's something so simple like change in my pocket, where else am I not listening that could have bigger ramifications than that,
Yeah, human design is really about getting us out of our heads and putting us back into our bodies to be making decisions. When we went down this long road of logic, and have swung very far that way, we're swinging back into creative energy. And so we need to be trusting our initial kind of responses more, especially if you have like sacral and splenic authority.
Yeah, and I would say, when you talk about how we went down this like intellectual kind of, like I have so much Aquarius and Virgo in my chart. Prior to, when I first started kind of gaining self-awareness that like, oh, this doesn't have to be my life kind of thing, when I was stuck in that marriage and like looking at my life, I started with religion and I got very fanatical. And when I was finally able to let go of the fear of all of that and I moved into atheism, and I very strongly, I became an intellectual bully. Like it was all about logic. It was all about science. It was all about, very Aquarius. And so what I've learned, though, is through those two extremes, is that I am meant to just be still and listen to my body. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Not because there's this part of me, and I could probably guess where it comes from. I have an Aries ninth house, right? But there's this part of me that really just wants to put everything out there. You know what I mean? And so
impulsive.
Very impulsive. And so, especially when it comes to anything related to higher beliefs, life philosophies, do you know people's purpose? Like I want to tell you all about your purpose,
Well, because you can see it too, because you're a projector.
Right. And but what I've learned is, when I came out of atheism and I finally started doing like the learning astrology and kind of moving into tarot a little bit and things like that, I didn't run off and say anything to people. I didn't like post about it. I didn't do what I would typically do. But I realized I kind of needed that time in my life because it taught me, to, like you said, it's like a pendulum, right? Like I went from this extreme to this extreme, and I kind of had to, because I can tend to get carried away. And I don't know if that's a projector thing, but I can get very carried away. And so I needed the intellectualism and the science and all that to kind of keep me kind of centered, I guess.
Well, you have a defined head in Ajna, and like I said, our next episode will get into the defined and undefined centers and what that means. But so those types of people, and there's no connection there to your throat, I don't believe, and so you tend to just be all up in your head all the time.
Very much so.
So that's a very common thing.
Yeah, but being able to realize it's not, the intellectualism is important.
Yes.
We need logic. But there is something to be said for intuition, and the difference between fear and intuition, or anxiety and intuition, is very helpful to learn too, because I've noticed that when it's something that I feel that's fear-based, it's usually, there's nothing to it. But when it's just this kind of, like you said, this just knowing.
Yes.
It, like, there was an example when I was like probably 16. And teenager years where I would just know things. I would know I was going to see certain people I hadn't seen in 2 years, you know,
Yes.
and they would show up that day, or just those kind of things, those like knowings.
Yes.
Those have always been part of my life.
That's a lot that comes from that defined spleen. Like you just, yeah, there's a gate, I want to say it's 57. That's like the most intuitive gate in the whole human design body graph, and it comes out of the spleen. And so it can be very psychic, but it's one of those things that it's just a whisper in the beginning, and it's just like, you know, and everybody has stories of when they should have,
Could have, would have.
could have, would have, should have done this, should have done that, and it would have turned out differently. And a lot of that is not following your authority when that happens. Which moves us on to emotional authority. Now, emotional authority is very complex because it runs in waves, and it basically means like you need to wait and take your time to make decisions. You're not designed to be impulsive. And I should say this too, if you have your emotional center defined, more than likely you have emotional authority. And so your emotions override everything.
Isn't that what Isaac has?
Yes.
Yes, that's right. I remember you saying that.
And so each gate that comes out of the emotional solar plexus has its own wave pattern. And so learning about your emotional waves and learning about how your energy fluctuates within those waves is going to be crucial for you in decision making. And so that means, and I don't want to go into the actual like sine wave patterns because it's hard to convey by speaking anyway. You kind of have to see it. But some waves are like build up, and then, you know, drop off really fast. So it'll build up into like a big crescendo, and then, Some waves are kind of like flat, and then it'll just be like a little blip up or a little blip down or a little blip up. And so depending on what's defined in that emotional solar plexus for you is kind of how your emotional waves will come. And sometimes it'll be different, obviously, because you have more than one gate defined. And you're really meant to take time to ride your entire emotional wave before you make a decision. So if somebody invites you to dinner, just say, hey, can I get back to you with that? I got to check my schedule or whatever. That should be your default response if you have emotional authority. It should never be like yes or no. But what you have to remember is, though, in the moment, if you feel good about the opportunity, so say your friend invited you to dinner and you got, because you still have sacral authority most likely if you have emotional, but even if not, if it felt good for you, you want to make sure it still feels good. It still feels like a yes the entire wave. If you wake up the next morning and you're like, oh, I just don't want to do that at all, it's a total no for me for one reason or another, then you can say, hey, it's not going to work for me this week, or can we plan something next month or whatever. That way you're not over committing. So anybody that has emotional authority is not meant to make decisions in the moment. Things need to stay consistently good over time despite your mood fluctuation, because emotional authority people have natural emotional wave moods. Like they'll just be, and it's so strange as a non-emotional person. I'm like, why? Like, why are you feeling like down or melancholy
But I think
right now? Like, when you learn to embrace that, you find that there's so much creative energy too in the melancholy and in the down wave and but it's all when we try to think that it's something wrong is when we start to get into
which I feel like is the lesson for us through people we know that are emotional authority, right? Especially
like all of your children.
Right. Especially for, like you said, you and I who don't have that, and we're just like, what is going on? But in general, I think it's a really good advice to tell people don't make any decisions when you're overly emotional, whether you're overly excited or overly melancholy or whatever. I think that's very good advice. And so maybe that's something we're meant to learn from those with the emotional authority, you know. Because it's definitely, there's things that I, even as somebody that doesn't have that, And I'm sure you too, where I've said yes to something because it felt good in the moment, and then the next day I was like, man, why did I say yes to that? Do you know what I
That's
mean?
just being a projector. So. But yeah, emotional authority is it's tough. And when you're a non-emotion type, so if you have like if you have an undefined emotional solar plexus, you don't like conflict at all. And so people who have regular emotional waves are like, ugh, it can be hard to manage those relationships. And that's also what we're here to learn. So that's
It's funny.
The reason we have open is to absorb that emotional energy from other people and learn and develop wisdom about it.
It's been very trying in my life with my children, but I will tell you I wouldn't change it because the fact that I was able to absorb that is what led me to understand my children's feelings and to take them into I don't want to cry. And to take them into consideration and change how I was parenting my children and how I was showing up for them and to get out of that awful marriage. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so now it's like on the other side of that, like my daughter is getting her CDA. She actually started her classes yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Her job's paying for it. And we were in the car and she was kind of worked up and she's like, well, I just have butterflies about this. And, and I said, baby, you're dealing with imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could tell like what she was feeling, and I could feel that. And so, but rather than it like overwhelming me because I've done so much work, I was able to kind of walk her through that and say, look, this is how I used to be, but for years now I've taught you how to face your fears, how to overcome these feelings, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so now here she is, and she's doing her CDA and she started her classes yesterday. So it's tough, like Liz is saying, it very much is, but the more you can try to, and this is why we say it's so helpful to know the people in your lives. Designs and astrology, because it really does help you know how to approach them and not personalize it, or not let it overwhelm you, because it can very emotional. That they can be very overwhelming.
They can be, especially when you're a non-emotional.
Yeah, very, very much so.
So the next type of authority is self-projected authority. And those type of people, it's usually people that just have like a G center activation to their throat, but they don't have anything else defined. You do have a G activation to your throat, but you have your spleen defined and that overrides it. But a self-projected authority is somebody that just needs a sounding board. They need somebody to just bounce ideas off of, to just talk things out. They move energy by talking. And they need, like my sister-in-law has this, and she's a self-projected authority, and she just needs to hear herself work through her own things. They don't need advice about things, especially if they're projectors. Like, don't give projectors advice. Just don't do it. It's not. Anyway,
there are very few people, like I would take advice from you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's very few people I want advice from.
It's a struggle. Anyway, but yeah, these self-projected people, they just need to talk things out and to have that sounding board. And so if you can be that and hold space for people without, for people that have a self-projected authority without judging or trying to insert your own opinion or things into, then that is a great thing for them. And then the final type of authority is ego authority, and that's run by your will center. And so you need to make decisions based on your energy and resources. And so that is, and I actually realized when I looked again at your chart and learned a little bit more that even though you have splenic authority, because you do have a defined will, you also have like a secondary ego authority or resource authority. So you really need to be making decisions based on, do I have the energy or do I have the resources to do this?
Makes complete sense.
Yeah. So those are the 5 authorities. So today we went over the 5 types and the 5 authorities. So we, just to wrap up, the 5 types are manifestor, manifesting generator, projector, and reflector. And the 5 authorities that you could have with those are sacral, splenic, emotional, self, and ego authority. So that kind of shows us how our energy works and how we're designed to make decisions. So giving some examples, I'm a projector and I have a splenic authority. So that means that my aura is focused and absorbing. I can get right to people's hearts. My aura like connects right into people's G centers. And which is why it's so hard to hear sometimes the things that projectors have to say when we're not invited, because we like literally are the definition of like cut to the heart. And my authority is splenic, which means I'm designed to make my decisions based on my initial response in a situation, and it can change over time. It's like a moment by moment thing.
I know this is probably getting a little long, but I do have a question for you. It can be very frustrating for me when, and I know this is probably a projector thing, when I can see something so clearly, but somebody is so stuck in their emotions about it, or so, and it's so frustrating because I'm like, well, here is where you're thinking wrong, or here's where you're doing, and it can be so frustrating. In order, I would say there's a lot of work that projectors have to do on just recognizing it's not our job to save everyone.
It's not.
We're here to guide, but that invitation is very important for that reason.
It is.
Because otherwise you're going to invest your limited energy, which we have limited energy, and you're going to invest that into people that have no desire to grow, no desire to...
I don't know if we were super heavy on that, but projectors... we have to rest.
Yeah.
We do not have the energy to be just going. I mean, like me, I have only my root motor defined, and I'm like almost a completely undefined projector. So I be sleeping. Like I take naps. I have to take that time for myself, or else.
Yeah, you're like less defined than I am.
Yeah.
I have all my like lower ones undefined,
two
but
centers defined.
Yeah, you do. You probably have even less energy than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you got so happy when I took a nap a couple weeks ago. You were like, "Yes, girl."
I know. I take naps like every day.
But sometimes for me, it's just a matter of, like, say I get out of work and I'm feeling like I need rest. I'll just take even just 10 or 20 minutes, to change and kind of just rest for a minute, and then I'll go and I'll cook dinner, or I'll do whatever I have to do. But so even at work, like if I'm there 8 hours, there might be a time where I just have to go in the bathroom for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And
projectors are really not designed to work 9 to 5.
That's my shift. It's rough some days.
Hopefully it's going to change. Hopefully the UAW will pave the way to a 4-day work week.
But yeah, so yeah, just to learning this stuff, I feel like has been just very helpful. Just to understand myself and to understand the people around me and how those energies affect each other. Yeah, it's been very life-changing.
Absolutely. Well, we hope that this was good foundational information for you today on human design, and that you have a better understanding. And we look forward to talking next time in our next foundational episode, where we'll go into the profiles and the lines, and kind of what the some of the energy centers, what it means to be defined and undefined in those spaces. So we look forward to talking to you next time on the Projector Planet podcast.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Projector Planet podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. This will guarantee you stay up to date on what next week's energy will bring. If you feel called to leave us a review to help the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again, and we will see you next week for more astrological and human design forecasts.